Well, good evening. My name is Phil Schomber. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speakers for tonight's program. Mary Buelow, one of our reference librarians, and Jerry Huffman from the U.S. Census Bureau. And they're going to discuss the 2020 census and why it's important and how we can all participate in it and ensure that Janesville gets a complete count. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry. Thanks, Jerry.
Complete count is a phrase you're going to hear a lot about in the next 15 or 20 minutes. The ultimate goal of the census is to count every person, count them only once, and count them in the right place. That's what we've been working years to get ready for over the course of the last year. My job is a partnership specialist. That means I get paid to travel around Wisconsin, meet with local groups, local communities, local governments, and talk about the census and why it's important for them. Little bit of history. 1790 was the first census. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were the guys who came up with the idea. And they knew that one of the primary reasons for the census was because congressional representation was based upon apportionment. So they knew they had to start counting them. And they sent them out into the field. In 1790, it was done by horseback, and largely by marshals and deputies, so a lot of things have changed since then. So imagine trying to travel that original 13 states, Kentucky, Maine, Vermont, and part of Tennessee by horse, and count and write down the name of every single individual, so you can appreciate how much harder it would have been then. The first census, 3.9 million people spread across those states and some of the regions. The largest city then was New York City with 30,000 people, which means it's about the same size as Manitowoc. So try to imagine New York is about the same size as Manitowoc. 2020 is going to change a lot. We're going to do a lot of things differently than we've done in the past. You probably remember the short form and the long form from your younger days and from your parents. Largely that's gone. We're going to be going online this year. You're going to be getting an invitation from the Census Bureau. You may already have it, but if you don't have it yet, don't be concerned. We're going to get to you. We're sending invitations to everyone to participate in the census because it really does matter on a local level. I don't care if we're talking about Beloit or we're talking about Brooklyn in New York. The census really does matter. Approximately 95% of the American households will be getting an invitation by mail. There's going to be some that are delivered by hand depending upon the circumstances and a few other variations, but be looking for that invitation. You will be getting it very, very soon. You're going to get a letter. It's going to give you a website with a special number on it. That's what you need to be able to go online. If you're concerned about computers, not to worry. We've got some good options. You can also call the Census Bureau on a telephone and do it by phone. You can request a paper version if that's really what you want. So we're going to do our job of trying to make it as easy as possible for you to take place in the census. Now on a local level, here's why the census is important. Everybody knows about federal funding. Federal funding is based upon population. The larger your city, the more federal funding. The smaller your city, the less federal funding. So we've been working well, obviously nationally, but especially here in Wisconsin and Rock County, putting together groups, a complete count committee that are working in the communities trying to get the word out about the census and how much it matters so everyone makes sure and participates in the census. And I can't underline that enough. The local census matters. Every year for the next 10 years, the federal government's going to carve up a pie with $680 billion. $680 billion. Every community deserves a chance to get what it's entitled to. And the only way that can happen is if you participate in the census. You'll hear people talking about the census or complaining about the census or I don't like the census. We need your help. We need everyone's participation. One of the most common questions that I get is, do I have to participate in the census? The polite answer is, yes, you do. Here's why. A, it matters. B, if you live in a community, if you drive on the road, if you have kids who have been in the school, if you're an older senior like I am, you might take advantage of some retirement food programs or different things. These are things that the census information helps set the funding for. So it really does make a difference. One of the things I want to encourage you to watch out for in Janesville and in the Rock County area, there's going to be different events like here at the library where if you need help with a computer, you don't like a computer, you can't see a computer, you don't understand computers, there'll be days where you can come in and get some help filling out your census form. And again, we really want to get that message across, how important it is that every person participates in the census this time. Ask for help. We will help you get help to do the census. The money truly matters. If your population goes down, there would be a corresponding drop in financial aid, depending upon your population. So you want to count every person that's there. And there are some groups that we know have a hard time answering the census for whatever reasons. Some seniors, some farm workers, some veterans. Help us spread the word, especially this year. We need your help in the census. One of the things I want to assure you on is privacy. There's a lot of concerns about it. Is my information safe? With the U.S. Census Bureau, your information is safe. I'll give you one good reason. People like me who work for the Bureau, we had to sign a pledge of confidentiality that we would not reveal information to anyone. If we were ever convicted of that or caught doing it, we're looking at, I think it's up to a 6-figure fine and 5 years in prison. We do not share information, period. End of discussion. It really is. I can't emphasize it enough. If you don't answer your census form, you're throwing away money for Janesville. And that's not a good situation at all. Please, please fill out your form. I want to ask everyone watching right now to please make sure and do it. It is the closest you'll come to pure democracy in that you can move the needle for your community. If you take the time to fill out the online form, or by telephone, or by paper, it's 9 questions. It'll take a couple of minutes. It's largely just asking things, your name, your address, how many people live with you, the name of everyone who lives with you, their birthdays. It's very general information, it really is. Please take the time to fill out that form. Thank you. Phil?
Many of us have heard about the potential for scams with something like the census. Is that something that we should be worried about?
Worried, no, but wary, yes. We're not going to call you or come to the door and ask for information. Phil, who did you vote for last time? Are you a member of this party or that party? Do you have a social security number? You know, for this to be legal with the census, I really need to see your bank records. Could you show me some ID that proves you have a bank account? Those are red flags to close the door, hang up the phone, call us, call the police. We would have no reason to ask that question, those kinds of questions. So if somebody shows up, best thing you do is hang up the phone or slam the door.
So we should be on the lookout for those kind of questions. But say if somebody comes knocking on my door and says that they're a census worker, is there some way up front that I can verify that to know that they're legitimate?
3 things to look out for. Pardon me. All of our workers will be wearing probably a polo shirt, a golf shirt. It's going to say U.S. Census on the shirt. That's hint number 1. They're going to have a federal ID, so ask to see their tag. And people know what an ID looks like. I mean, it's a driver's license. Your picture's on it. It says U.S. Census Bureau, a few other bits of information. The third step, bear with me, I just totally forgot it. It'll come to me. Okay, that's an edit point. What's the third step, Bob? I just totally forgot. The shirt, the ID, oh, the bag, the bag. The third thing to look for, every legitimate census worker is going to have a backpack with them. And on one side of the bag, big print, white background, blue letters, U.S. Census Bureau. If they can't show you all three, don't let them in. Don't talk to them. They've got to be able to show up with the right gear so you can be sure you really are talking to a census person.
Well, good. Thanks, Jerry. I think that's a big help.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay. Okay, so tonight we actually had been planning to have 3 speakers. Unfortunately, our third speaker was not able to make it. So I am standing in for the City of Janesville Clerk Treasurer, Dave Godek. Dave has been organizing the Complete Count Committee for Janesville and trying to make sure that everyone in Janesville gets counted. And again, as Jerry mentioned, the reason that we have this count is because of the Constitution. It is written into the Constitution that every 10 years, everyone in this country gets counted. And it's not buried in some amendment way down on the list. It's right up at the top. Article 1, Section 2 requires a head count of everyone in the United States every 10 years. At this point in history, the United States Census Bureau is responsible for conducting that decennial census. Why is the census important? Jerry talked a little bit about this, but it does determine the representation in the House of Representatives, how many people represent us in Congress, and which geographies they represent us for. It is useful for making business decisions. Those numbers that we get for statistics, those numbers are used by business people who are trying to cite new factories, new distribution centers, new retail stores. And right here in Janesville, we have a great example about how this works. So in 2015, Dollar General was looking for a place for a new distribution center. They had several properties in mind, and they all fit a lot of their criteria. They had great transportation. They had good tax incentives. They had all kinds of other things in place. But the thing that really tipped the balance for Janesville is they looked at those census numbers and said, we have a workforce. So when they built here and they advertised for employees, there were employees to fill those jobs. That's important. So that census data helps people make business decisions. It's also useful for making decisions about transportation. We need to know where the people are, where they're going to be moving to, how they're going to be moving around. So a lot of you certainly have experienced, I know I have, going up I-90, and there's all that construction that's been going on. Well, just remember what it was like before that construction. Trying to get through on 2 lanes in each direction with all that truck traffic. There was a large campaign to be able to expand I-90 from the state line all the way up to Madison. And one of the biggest things that made that tipping point, that made the difference and tipped the point to have the decision go in our favor was the census numbers. That we have the traffic, we have the people, we need to expand that highway. And that is beneficial for all of us. And as Jerry mentioned, the census is important for distributing over $675 billion annually in federal funds. That's just for 325 federal programs. Now, we've been doing this every 10 years. And we kind of know the track record of trying to get people to respond. And Janesville, well, it doesn't have the greatest track record in Wisconsin. In 2010, our city had an initial response rate of 78%, and it was very hard for the Census Department to get out and get that information and make sure that Janesville was counted. We don't want that to happen again. We need the funds in order to actually support our community and make sure that we can provide the services that everyone deserves. So what the Census Bureau's been doing is, as Jerry mentioned, they work with the complete count committees to educate people about the census. And so there is a complete count committee here in Janesville. Dave, who I'm speaking for now, and I and quite a few other people are involved here in Janesville. A lot of individuals representing government, nonprofits, businesses, and community advocates. And the purpose is to spread the word about the census and to engage in hard-to-count populations. So who makes up the hard-to-count population? First, children. Children under the age of 5 are most likely to be undercounted. And no one's quite sure why. When they ask for feedback, though, people say, well, I counted everyone, but I really didn't think you meant the baby. So I left the baby off. Or they might say, well, they're a little young. I didn't really want to get a paper record on them yet. But think about this. A child who is not counted is not accounted for in that first 10 years of their life. In that first 10 years, the documentation is not there for them to get services, for planning. We just need those numbers. Another hard-to-count population is young householders. So if you think, if someone's 25 years old, 10 years ago when the 2010 census happened, they were 15. They were in high school. They were doing all high school things. They were not paying attention to this sort of thing. So this is their first census. A lot of them might not know what it's about, or they might not know that it is required that we do it. They might get the card in the mail and say, well, I'm too busy. It's really important that we get the word out that everyone needs to fill out the census because we need to know who's here for planning purposes and also for that funding. Renters also are hard to count. And that's just a real practical thing. If you think over in 4th Ward where we have all of those beautiful old mansions that have been broken up into apartments, can you tell from the street how many units are there? Is that one a 3-unit building or 6? Maybe 7 if you count that room up under the eaves. So the census needs to identify, and they worked hard last summer. They were going around neighborhoods last summer and trying to identify all the units so we could so they could send those postcards. So the other problem with renters is if property managers don't allow census workers access to the property, they can't go knocking on the doors. So it's really important to get the word out to renters, to property managers, how important the census is. Minorities are also often undercounted. So there's several reasons for that. One is they're more likely to be renters statistically. Another, that they might have more concerns about putting their data down. There was a big fuss last summer about whether or not the census was going to include a citizenship question. And that concerned a lot of communities of color. And there is no citizenship question. The Supreme Court decided that last year. There's no question on the paperwork. It will not be asked. No one will ask it. And yet that concern still exists. And so we need to alleviate that concern and let them know there is no citizenship question. Immigrants of any nationality also can be undercounted. Not everyone does a census every 10 years. Some countries don't do it at all. Some do a census regularly, but they handle it very differently. They don't mail things to the home. What they do is they shut the country down for a day. 24 hours, nobody leaves their home, except the school teachers. because the school teachers become census workers and they go around and knock on doors. And that's how it's done in some countries. It's not how it's done here. But someone who is an immigrant may be expecting a whole different process. We need to let people know how it works. People with disabilities may have challenges. There are ways that people who cannot use computers have other options. People with other kinds of disabilities can access the form and answer the questions. Senior citizens. There's the sort of myth that a lot of senior citizens don't like to use computers. I know many senior citizens who love their computers, and I know many younger people who don't like their computers. But senior citizens, statistically, even before we had an online census, were typically undercounted, especially if they are staying with a family member and don't have their own household. And the homeless. If someone does not have an address, a post office address, then we can't mail them anything. So there have to be other ways for people who are homeless to get their census data input. And there are many. And we will talk about some of that a little later. Census information is aggregated. So they collect all this information from each of us individually, and then they turn around and they turn it into just numbers. No individual data is released. They turn it into data sets, and then they check those data sets to make sure that the data is anonymous. And that is true with the 10-year census. It's true with all the other censuses that the Census Department puts together. And I know that from personal experience as a librarian, where I am looking for data. Someone wants statistics for a small geography, and they want it as detailed as possible. And I go and I look, and the census gives me an answer of not available. They looked at those numbers for that geography and said, it's too easy to figure out an individual person just from that data. We will not release the data for that geography. You have to go the next level up. If I was looking at township, I have to check county. If county still doesn't provide an anonymous level of data, I have to check state. The census is really good at that. And there are days that I'm annoyed at that as a data searcher, and then there are days that as an individual citizen, I'm very grateful for it. And as Jerry mentioned, the Census Bureau does sign lifetime confidentiality agreements. It's not for just the window of time they're working for the census. It's for their entire life. And criminal penalties, if one of them violates that oath, that confidentiality agreement, is up to 5 years in prison and or fines up to $250,000. We're not talking little insignificant matters of fines. And then as to completing the census, it's easy. So this year, the answers to the census questions can be completed online, by telephone, or through the mail. And for an average household, the Census Bureau will take 10 minutes on average. The start of the census has 4 questions. How many people live in the home? Are there additional people that will be staying in the home on April 1st? Not included in question 1. Is this a house, apartment, or mobile home? What's your telephone number? The only reason they need the phone number is if they can't read something later on and they want to call back and clarify. Then after those 4 initial questions for the entire household, there are 5 questions for each person living in the home. Name, gender, age on April 1st. April 1st is the official day of count, and date of birth. If someone is Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, or what's the person's race. Please help us spread the word to complete the census. To complete the census, it is important for our community. And on behalf of Dave Godak and the Clerk Treasurer's Office, if you do have questions, you are welcome to contact them. I will switch over right now and to the presentation that I had prepared as a librarian. Okay, so we've mentioned this before about why we count the census. I can sit there and talk about the data, that I have used the data a lot, but back to the foundation of the 10-year census, we count the census because of congressional representation. So here is the 2010 census, official results, and in 2010, some states gained population, some states lost population. And there are 435 congressional representatives in the House of Representatives, and that number doesn't change. So if someone's population went up and they get more representatives, that means someone else has to lose. So the census is really about our voice in Congress, state by state. It's also where the lines are drawn within each state. If we take a look down here, way in the lower left-hand corner of Wisconsin, District 4. That's Milwaukee. Very small on the map, very densely populated. Same number of people as there are in District 7, up in the uppermost northwestern part of the state. Huge geography, same number of people as District 4. So the lines are drawn based on population. And then, as we've mentioned before, the distribution of funds. I think Jerry mentioned that. Dave's presentation mentioned that. That $675 billion annually from 325 federal programs. Dislocated worker assistance. After GM closed, that was vital for Janesville. A lot of people took advantage of that, and we got that based on census numbers. Homeland Security grants, healthcare centers, Medicaid, S-CHIP, the child health insurance, substance abuse treatment. That's been very important for a lot of communities in the last few years, unfortunately. School lunch programs, low-income energy assistance, and that highway planning and construction. The census does not determine the size of the pie. The pie is set by Congress. They say there's X number of dollars, and they have tied that to population. So the census determines the size of each slice and where that slice goes. So estimates do vary, but this is a handout from the George Washington University of Public Policy Counting for Dollars project. And in Wisconsin in fiscal year 2016, based on data from the 2010 census, in the year 2016, the state of Wisconsin received $12,608,000,000 and some odd change, almost $500,000 change. So that is money that if we run into an undercount, we won't get as much. We need to count everybody. It's estimated that the loss to the community is a minimum of $1,600 per person per year. Doesn't sound like much, just one person, $1,600. Multiply that by 10 years. Well, we're now up to $160,000. And then add in that one person usually isn't missed by themselves. It's usually a family, so maybe 2, maybe 4. Those numbers add up quickly when people are not counted. That data is not just useful for money, but it's also used for data-informed decision-making. It's where we draw our school district lines, where businesses decide to build and relocate. Planning for housing. How many houses do we need in future years? Transportation. And then for people who don't like government funding and they say, oh, just get a grant. Nonprofits are out there, charities. They can help out in place of government. Well, guess what? Whose data those agencies use in order to apply for those grants? It's census data. We don't get those charity dollars. We don't get those nonprofit grants without the census. The data is also used to enforce laws, regulations, and policies against discrimination. So that race question that some people are kind of uncomfortable about, and a lot of us wish maybe we didn't have to ask it. Well, that question is trying to identify how many people of different races exist in a certain community. And if there's questions of discrimination, that's a baseline that they use. But again, how the information is not used. Not just it's confidential. This is a quote from the census law. U.S. Code, Title 13, Section 7, in no case shall information furnished under this section, in other words, the information you give to the census, be used to the detriment of any respondent or other person. In no case can the information be used against you. Participating is not going to haunt you. They're not going to share it with your landlord. They're not going to share it with child welfare, with the police. So you've had all this time here of us telling you how important the census is, and please count and please participate. Now I'm going to talk about how to do it. Make a plan. Think about which method you will use. When you get that postcard, are you going to use the online form? Is that easiest for you? If you don't have a computer at home, we have computers here at the library. We will have a computer dedicated set up this week specifically for using at the census. We will have days where there will be volunteers here helping people, encouraging them to fill out the census. If you don't want to use computer, that's fine. You can call on the telephone. The invitation will have the phone number. If they don't, call the library, we have it. The paper form, you can call and request a paper form. Anyone who does not respond by the first week in April will automatically get a paper form. Or you can wait. You can wait through the rest of March. You can wait through all of April. Starting in May, anyone who has not responded will get a knock on the door. Census worker. There's that picture of that briefcase that Jerry was talking about with the label, United States Census. That person will have that name badge, and they will have their ID shirt. Those people will start coming around in May. And you know, hopefully the COVID virus is a flash in the pan. If it's not, I don't want anyone knocking on my door. I'm going to make sure that I get my census done so they don't have to come. If you're in a multi-generational household, we mentioned seniors get missed, we mentioned babies get missed. Count everyone, oldest to youngest. If someone in your family is pregnant, all babies born April 1st and before need to be counted. Now, if I were pregnant, which I'm not, I would actually wait until April 1st just to see when that baby's going to be born. Because any baby that's born within this census period, I want to be counted. There's a lot of blended families, joint custody, other issues where kids are not living with their biological parents. Decide which parent will count the kids. Count any children living with you. foster children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, children of friends. They all count, whoever's in your household on April 1st. Because the kids need to be counted. If that baby is not counted, they're not accounted for in the first 10 years of their life. Multifamily households. Sometimes a family's in transition, they're staying with relatives. Everyone needs to be counted. Every family member of both families needs to be counted. And again, if your lease says there's 5 people allowed or 6 people and you might have 10, this will not be shared with the landlord. This is only for the census. Occasional couch surfer. So you have someone who does stay with you periodically, someone who doesn't have a permanent address. So there are ways to count the homeless. If they do go in for services between March 30th and April 1st, they are counted where they receive services, whether that's a shelter, a meal site, a food bank, they are counted there. April 9th to May 4th, people who are staying at transitory locations such as motels, campgrounds, migrant worker camps, they're counted during that time period. People who do not have an address can fill out the form themselves using the online form and give the location of where they're staying. I'm living in this park on this side. But if you're concerned that someone has no place to be, you want them to be counted, you want our community to have the funds to actually serve the people who are here, and you're comfortable, invite them to stay overnight April 1st and count them in your household. So as I mentioned, the census is confidential, but the other thing is that only census data can be used for funding decisions. So when they set up that Title 13 law about the U.S. Census, they said confidentiality, they set up a firewall where the census can't share any information and they cannot pull any other information from other federal agencies. So I've heard people say, oh, I'm on Section 8, I'm on food share, I file my taxes, and think that the census will use that data. Think again, they can't, they cannot. You must fill out the census form to be counted. So I covered just a few highlights and a few generalities of who to count, and I'm sure there's a lot more questions. And I don't have all the specific answers, but I can show you where to look. So go to 2020census.gov, the official census webpage. That's where we're going to go when they open it up on March 12th, so we can start putting in our online answers. Then up at the top, there's a menu. Get facts, how to respond, why your answers matter. If you want more information on that, if this last hour hasn't done it, you can look there. Privacy and security. But if you click on how to respond, there's a pull-down menu, and it comes up who to count. If you click that, there's a whole bunch of options for special circumstances. Babies actually born on census day, there's a plus in front of that. If I were to open up that plus, there'd be tons of information of when I should count the baby and when I shouldn't. People who move on census day. Well, if I move out, but I'm not in my new place yet, where do I count? Click that plus, it'll tell you. Visitors, students, military personnel, people in shelters, people who are displaced by natural disasters, people in healthcare facilities. It gives a lot of answers. And if that's not enough, we will be able to find more information for you. The census can, if you know it's a big bureaucracy, check with your local library. We'll dig out the answer for you, the official one from the U.S. Census. The other thing that Jerry mentioned was avoiding frauds and scams. So you heard him tonight talking about how to avoid frauds and scams and some things to watch out for. You can also look it up on 2020census.gov under Privacy and Security, Avoiding Frauds and Scams. And some of the highlights, again, the Census Bureau will never ask for your Social Security number. They will never ask for your bank account or credit card numbers. They will never ask for money or donations. They will not contact you on behalf of a political party. The political party, the political process has nothing to do with the census. They will not send your census form by email. You will get it in the mail. So any of these red flags, you want to call and report suspicious activity. So that number is 1-800-923-8282. If you don't remember that, then go back and check at 2020census.gov, Privacy and Security, Avoiding Frauds and Scams. It'll tell you how to do that. And again, the census is confidential. You may hear about people who use the census for genealogy and family history research. Well, eventually they make the records open. It takes 72 years. They are completely sealed, those name files. And then and only then the census is turned over to the National Archives. So my genealogy friends and the people who come into the library, they are very anxiously waiting for the National Archives in 2022 or thereabouts, maybe 2023, the National Archives will release the 1950 census. This year's census, this year's count, those names will not be released until 2092. And if your landlord does care in 2092 how many people were in your apartment back in 2020, that is some science fiction future that I know nothing about. So the census, it's our way of being visible. If we are not counted, we are invisible. And the political power structure, all those people in Washington, all those people in Madison, they don't have to pay any attention to you. If they don't know you're there, they're going to potentially ignore your needs. So it's important to be visible, to be counted. This is a quote from the Minnesota Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, who is a White Earth Band of Ojibwe. And she says, it's a radical act of saying, I have to be counted. And you have to see my community, and they have to be counted. We are here. So thank you very much for your attention. I encourage you to fill out the census.